There's this Dhammapada. I will endure abuse even as the elephant in battle withstand the arrow shot from a bow. Verily, most people undisciplined. This is from the Dhammapada verse 320. So the question is, Tanajan, how do we relate to this guide of our life affected by the recent pandemic and faced by all human beings on this earth realm?
In the time of the Buddha, the elephant was a creature of great merit, long life, and a very intelligent animal as it is today. But it was a creature that they would train. The kings would train for their armies. So it's an animal that was known to be trained, well practiced, had the qualities of patience, endurance, and it would lead the royal army out into battle whenever there was battle. So it kind of symbolizes these various qualities of training, patience, endurance, not giving up, not giving in to difficulties, kind of symbolic of that. So when the Buddha is saying to be like the elephant in battle, it's meeting with arrows and swords and spears coming its way, but it doesn't give up. Why did the Buddha compare life and us to the elephant? Well, because we have to learn how to train ourselves in the Dhamma to meet with what life brings us. Because life can be like a battle, can't it? It can be almost daily that we get different kinds of arrows coming our way, whether it's the physical pain of the body, living in the world, pains of hunger, heat, cold, tiredness, injuries, aging, or the pain of other people in the world, other people's views and opinions, criticism of us, unfair injustices, all kinds of mental pain as well. The Buddha was encouraging us to be patient and endure through some of these things, or all of these things, because you can't avoid them in the end. You can't get rid of them. You can't expect life to be without some pain and difficulty. But the way to deal with it, the Buddha pointed out, is to train yourself to be patient, not to give up, not to just become angry when something goes wrong or failure comes your way, to be patient with it, to learn from it, to use your training, and to be one, see yourself as one in training. And what the Buddha taught is a training, whether on the level of dana or sila or bhavana. We're training. It's an ongoing thing. Your life, obviously, we are subject to karma. So if bad things are happening, unpleasant experiences come our way, you can say, well, this is old karma that we've made coming back to us. But at the same time, life in its nature is not pleasant all the time. There is some pleasantness, some ease, comfort, some success, some happiness. But there's also plenty of unpleasant experiences there. So how do we face that reality? As we train ourselves in patience and in wise reflection, in wisdom, so that we don't keep reacting with suffering and stress in our minds, but we can understand what's going on. So an arrow comes, well, if you're mindful and you're seeing the impermanence of that experience, and it doesn't have to cause you any suffering or anger or fear. It's just an arrow. So we have that image of the Buddha on the night of his enlightenment. Mara is attacking the Buddha. You see those pictures, and all the hordes of Mara, the armies of Mara, they fire their arrows at the Buddha, and all those arrows turn into flowers. That's because the Buddha is someone who's well trained, doesn't give in to unpleasant experiences with anger or any kind of negativity. He has the right qualities because of his training, the patience, the mindfulness, the metta, the karuna, the compassion, the kindness. So those arrows are turned into something good. So arrows turning into flowers symbolizes that. So we have to train ourselves to be tough in the practice. You can unmute.
Sorry, Lompo. There's a question from the public. Dear Lompo, was the Buddha born and enlightened on the same day and month, the Vesak day, or Vesak is just the day that the Buddha gained enlightenment? Thank you.
Uh, well, the legend says that all these three events happened on the same full moon day. In the Western calendar, that full moon day will be a different day of the week every year. This year it's today, next year it could be on the 10th of May or whatever, but it's the full moon that is significant. And the full moon always seems to be an auspicious day. The brightness of the moon just symbolizes so much, it's a very positive energy. So I can believe that these three events happened on the full moon day in their respective years. Um, but on a deeper level, we're just acknowledging the fact the Buddha was a human being, firstly. So even though he was a special human being, he was a human being like us. He's not a god or some sort of unusual, out of this world person. He was a human being. So he had a mother and a father. He was born. His enlightenment experience happened. He was a human being who, through his own efforts, practiced with great sacrifice to the point where he freed his mind from suffering, freed his mind from the causes of suffering, greed, anger, delusion, experienced what we call the deathless or nibbana. But he's a human being, so that's saying we can do that too. We have the same potential as the Buddha for enlightenment. And then the day of parinibbana, the same full moon day in May, is just a reminder, well, because he's a human being, even though he was enlightened, he still has to die because he has a body like us. He gets old, gets sick, and dies. So they talk about two kinds of nibbana. There's the nibbana while a person, man or woman who's reached nibbana is still alive. They still have a body. They still may have to experience pain, unpleasant experiences while they're alive. So there's a remainder of old karma coming up. And then there's the nibbana without remainder. So once that enlightened person dies, there's no more birth because they've reached the deathless. There's no more causes for birth. There's no more craving and attachment. So then it's without remainder. So they don't come back. No more birth. But there's these different levels you can reflect on. There's the full moon, the auspicious occasion. Buddha is born, enlightened, dies. He's still a human being, but he's an extraordinary human being because he reached enlightenment and taught us the way as well.
Okay, thank you, Long Paul. Another question. Tan Ajahn, with the rising numbers of death from the pandemic, my irrational fear of the pandemic is disrupting my life. I tried to calm my mind with chanting and meditation, but the mind remains calm only during the time of practice. How can I maintain a longer period of calmness and fearlessness?
Keep practicing. I think what you're doing is already very good, the chanting and the meditation. And we have to be very patient with our own emotions. Why do we have fears? Because we attach to this body as a self, and we see the coronavirus or any other illness as a threat to this sense of self. But when you do your chanting and you calm yourself in meditation, if only briefly, that sense of well-being that starts to come up is like helps to steady your mind so you can contemplate what's going on. And your contemplation will probably bring you to the conclusion, oh, this human body is impermanent. It is subject to aging. Sickness is normal. Death is normal. There's no way around it. So, the pandemic is only one potential form of death, isn't it? You could die from crossing the road and hit by a car, slipping over in your bathroom, other kinds of illness, or just old age. The only thing you know for sure is that you will get old and die. That you know for sure. But how and when, you don't know. So the Buddha encouraged us to learn from these experiences and from these reflections to take advantage from the suffering of being a human being. And the main suffering of being a human being is the fact that we don't live forever. We will die. Train yourself to understand that point. Reflect on it every day. The Buddha said, every day remind yourself, I will get old, sick, and die. The point is not to make yourself depressed and miserable, is to so your thinking and your attitudes become in line with Dhamma, with truth. And so when you hear the news of pandemic, of course, you have to be careful, follow the government regulations and guidelines, wear your mask, practice isolation, social distancing, whatever, as well. But with the internal emotions that come up, watch them. Fear arises, passes away. When we're fearful, we've got caught into some thinking that is not yet wise or true, isn't it? It's just delusion, blind attachment. So try to start becoming mindful of that. Observe the feeling of fear arise, pass away. Question it. Ask yourself, because the truth is you're going to die anyway, whether it's the pandemic or something else. And also because of this awareness that life is fragile, I'm not here forever, use your time. Say, oh yeah, the pandemic may be the end of me, so I'm going to use every day to practice the Dhamma, do more good, do more dana, keep the precepts, do my meditation chanting, help other people, use it to your advantage. This is how the Buddha encourages us to practice, is to learn from suffering and use it to our advantage.
Thank you, Long Po. Another question from the public says here, Ajahn, what is the antidote to greed and impatience?
Non-greed and patience, which in one sense is what you have to do. You have to become aware of the state of mind that is not greedy. So as you practice mindfulness, you do become aware of many different mind states, mental states, and you're not greedy all the time. So try to become aware when you're not greedy. So you're familiar with that. Oh, at a time when you're feeling kind of calm, content, there's nothing you particularly want at that moment. Appreciate that moment. And you might notice in our day, there are many moments when you don't particularly need anything. And it's not because you've got what you want, it's just your mind is content enough at that moment. That's one part of it. It's just becoming familiar with the mind, not wanting, that's at content, at peace within itself. But then you also have to help that to grow through the practice of mindfulness. So developing meditation practices will help. Developing the state of mindfulness and the calm that comes from that gives you this sense of fullness. Just like when you're hungry, you eat food and you feel full. When you practice mindfulness regularly, you start to feel full. Your mind is not scattered or wanting other things because it's mindful. Or if desires arise, you can also reflect on them and see, well, these desires are impermanent. They arise, pass away. So that's another way to deal with greed. And the other thing is to look at the disadvantages or the unattractive aspects of whatever you're greedy for. So, for example, with food, it is a form of greed. From time to time, we get to have desire for food, imagine it, proliferate around it, want it. Well, just remind yourself, what is food? What happens when you eat? You eat, goes into your body, it becomes something unattractive in the body, and then we excrete the remainder out. You can use this way of reflection, what we call wise reflection, directed to the object of your greed, to bring the mind back to a place of normality or non-greed, where you say, it's only that much, it's only that good, the happiness, the pleasure I get is only that much, it doesn't last that long. So using mindfulness and wise reflection in this way will help.
Sister Malika from Brisbane, you can unmute and ask your question.
Yeah.
Yes, you can proceed, Sister Malika.
Okay. Ajahn, deepest sympathies for the loss of your mother, and I just wanted to know, like, as a monk, is it different? You cope with the emotion of losing a loved one? Any advice for lay people how to cope with that too? Thank you, Ajahn.
Well, as a monk, I'm still a breathing, feeling human being, but I have the advantage of many, many years of practicing Sila, Samadhi, Panya, Samatha, Vipassana. So every day I reflect on my own mortality, that I may die today. I reflect on the mortality of the people I know, other monks, friends, family, parents. I do that every day because that's what the Buddha taught, and I trust in the wisdom of the Buddha. And so it's gradually educating us. When you do that reflection, you develop mindfulness of impermanence of this body directly to yourself or to others. You're constantly bringing that up so that, particularly with an elderly parent, of course, you still have your deep emotional involvement with them because you've lived your whole life with them. But at the same time, with parents, you have usually speaking, when they live to an old age, you have many years to prepare for their death. And it's a preparation through meditation, wise reflection, doing what you can for them. And if you repeatedly do that, when the time finally comes, of course, it's sad, but at the same time, you're ready for it because you're expecting it. It's normal. You know, I must die, they must die. You reflect on it every day. And that helps you to deal with the sadness of it, not to get overwhelmed by grief. Maybe those who practice for longer and done this more, maybe they cope with it a bit better. Um, but you don't have to be a monk or a nun to do this. As a lay person, every day reflect on the impermanence of life. The people you love, you're attached to, they will not be here forever. Every time you talk to someone, just reflect at the end of that conversation, maybe this is the last time I'll talk to them. Maybe I'll never talk to them again. Every time you see someone, you visit them, remind yourself, maybe this is the last time I'll ever see them alive. Even if they live next door or they live in another country, it doesn't change. You constantly reflect on impermanence like this, so your mind it knows the way things are, and that helps you to think clearly rather than be overwhelmed by your emotions.
Okay, thank you, Paul. There's another question. Tan Ajahn, thank you for giving us this opportunity to clear our doubts. Many Dhamma teachers have regularly taught that it is impossible to practice the Dhamma and achieve Nibbana as a heavenly being. However, it was stated that the Buddha had taught Abhidhamma for 3 months to his former mother in Tusita heaven, and that many of the Devas had attained fruition. Is it possible to take rebirth as a heavenly being and maintain our Dhamma practice and attain arahantship in the heavens? May I know what are Tan Ajah's thoughts on this? Thank you, Tan Ajahn.
Uh, well, the truth is, I haven't died yet, so I can't give you first-hand information. Because of that, I would recommend practicing for Nibbana in this very life. Why wait a whole life to start practicing when you get to a heaven realm? If you're going to get to a heaven realm, practice in this life. Make it certain, make it sure in this very life. Having said that, of course, we know from the life story of the Buddha, from the sutras, well, heaven realms exist. But the general teaching is that the heaven realms are not ideal for the practice. Most people, even Buddhists who have practiced meditation, done good in their lives, practiced and achieved a heavenly rebirth. When they get there, it's not the best place to practice samatha vipassana. There's less dukkha around, so that the tendency is to indulge, to enjoy it, and the mind is unable to really get into the practice. Normally speaking, that's the view of wise teachers over the years. It doesn't mean to say necessarily it's absolutely impossible, and especially around a Buddha, many unusual things happen. So maybe a Buddha is able to teach even a Deva or a Brahma. But for us, I would expect the human realm is the best place to be practicing. And so many people, when they pass away, if they feel they haven't reached Nibbana yet, then they aspire to a human rebirth. And it's the ideal place to practice because you have a mixture of sukha and dukkha,
你说的意思，这个是因
pleasure.
为
If you
三摩
can
地带嘛，这个是三摩地带，你说明尤其这个是理所当然，但是
if you appreciate that fact, then aspire for a human rebirth. Best of all is to be born with a Buddha. If you're not born with a Buddha, well, at least at a time when the Buddhist teachings are available. So you're inclining your mind to the practice of the Buddhist teachings in this life, day by day, moment by moment. If you, when you die, you haven't finished the job, you haven't reached Nibbana, well, that inclination to practice will come back and support you in your future life. So I would look at it that way around, rather than sort of making plans for your next birth, your heavenly realm, and all of that is just imagination and expectation and may lead to disappointment or confusion. Rather than doing that, I would just make your mind firm in its commitment to the practice in this very life, at this very moment, developing the Eightfold Noble Path right here and now, and make that so firm that you don't have any doubts or worries about what will happen next after you die. I would encourage you to do it that way around.
Thank you, Ajahn. One question from the public. Let's see. Dear Lompo, when I read Stillness last chapter, which is Ajahn Jayasaro wrote a poem, every time that I read it, I will cry. How should I?
Well, it's normal when faith arises that we get piti and pamoja, joy and rapture, and tears forming in the eyes is one form of rapture. It can happen when we meditate, a Dhamma talk or a poem, something expressing faith. You know, these are, particularly a poem is a kind of a devotional thing, expression of faith, which may resonate with you. So then the tears come. Maybe when you bow to a Buddha statue or meet a very venerable old monk, you know, there are many occasions where these tears form. If you develop meditation and particularly attaining some samadhi regularly, well, you may experience tears forming all the time, regularly, even to the point where your eyes can't form tears very much anymore. They dry out because you've shed so many tears. Speaking from experience there. But the tears in themselves are just an expression of piti, sukha, more refined state of mind. So they're not, I mean, I don't just from the sadness at the loss of a teacher, that may happen, but it's more from the joy of the Dhamma, the relief of the mind absorbing Dhamma, letting go of some of its attachment at that moment brings tears. And we can have tears from compassion when we see someone suffering and we empathize with them. We can have tears of faith in the teachings. You know, there's so many triggers, but in the end, it's just an expression of our own khandhas, our own body and mind, seeing or hearing the Dhamma or knowing the Dhamma in that moment.
Thank you, Lompo. Another question from Facebook. Dear Bante, must one meditate to attain Sotapanna, or are there other ways? If so, what are they?
Well, the important thing is to see meditation is really the development of the whole Eightfold Noble Path, qualities of mind developing together. So it's not necessarily or simply just sitting cross-legged with your eyes closed. You know, when you're standing, you can meditate and develop the path. When you're walking, when you're lying down, when you're working, when you're meditating, when you're eating, ultimately we have to see everything becomes part of the practice because your mind is with you all the time and you need to be training and developing the path all the time. Different situations will bring up their own problems and obstacles, of course, but to try and see it in this way, you know, you're driving your car to work, that's meditation in the sense you still have to develop mindfulness, keep your precepts, look after your mind, observe unwholesome Dhamma states, mental states arising and letting them go, cultivating mindfulness and other wholesome states. It's an ongoing practice. Sometimes it's easier, so that's why we do formal meditation retreats and sit meditation, but doesn't mean to say when you're not on a retreat or sitting meditation that you quit the practice and just let everything go and stop. You continue. So try and see it in that way. Bhavana means cultivation or development, and that's in all postures at all times. So somebody whose mindfulness and wisdom is very sharp, they may not need to sit meditation that much. Whereas somebody else may need to do a lot because they need it to really build up their mindfulness, kill a character, their barami, where they're at in their practice. Ajahn Chah, if you're reading that book, Stillness Flowing, I think it mentions it. He said when he was a young monk, he used to look at his teachers and perhaps he's a little over-attached to how they presented on the outside. And he had one teacher, Ginri, who he'd be watching because he seemed very mindful, composed, quiet, restrained, wise. And he noticed when in the afternoons, he'd start to walk meditation. Ginri would walk meditation just for a few minutes and then stop and go and do something else. And Ajahn Chah would doubt and think, he's not meditating. He stopped his walking and now he's off sewing or sweeping or doing something else. He can't be enlightened, or this isn't right. He would doubt. I think, if I remember rightly, I don't think this is mentioned in the book, but from what other teachers have told me, I think Lumpo Ginri knew what Ajahn Chah was thinking, which is often quite common with these monks who have very bright, clear minds. And so he brought it up with him later and said, Chah, which is how a senior monk addresses a junior one, Chah, some monks only step out on their walking meditation path for 2 or 3 steps and their mind is already in samadhi. Others spend all their time looking and thinking about it, but they're not in samadhi. So it's important to realize, each practitioner is maybe at a different level in their practice. So some need to do lots of sitting and walking and lots of practice in that way. Others have already developed many of the qualities they need, so they may do less of the formal meditation. But in the end, you're working with your mind all the time, constantly cultivating the path.
Thank you, Lumpur. Lumpur, after understanding Sunyata and Anatta, how do these people live their life? Do they still live normally and will choose to have families and all, even when they know about non-self? Is knowing non-self a bit conflicting with having any bonds in real life? I'm still confused about this aspect in Buddhism. Thank you.
Well, Sunyata and Anatta are very deep, profound insights, and we develop them on different levels. So generally, I think the agreed wisdom is that if someone has had deep insight into not self, then they give up the desire to form a family, to get married, have kids, even work in the world. Usually that if they have deep insight, to the level of reaching nibbana, then that's it for the world. But it doesn't mean to say they drop dead, but they don't need to get anything from the world anymore, because there's no more attachments. That includes forming relation, money, all the more stop functioning as a person, and they may still do a lot of good things for other people, teaching, helping and showing their compassion in different ways. But they don't need a family anymore. That desire is gone. They're celibate. They're celibate. They may previously have had a family, and there are some famous teachers who have had a family, had kids, had a job, earned money, but then as their practice progresses as a layperson, they give that up. Usually always in a very wise way. So maybe they're old enough, their children are old enough to look after themselves, and then their parent goes off to become a monk or a nun. Or the children are looked after and they go off, or there's some, the situation allows them to go off to practice more in a more full devoted way, maybe in a monastery as a monk or a nun. It goes that way around. It's not like you reach enlightenment and then you go back and start a family. You just don't need to think like that anymore. It goes the other way around. You may have had a family, or you may from a young age, say like myself, I made a conscious decision not to have a family, not to create bonds to the world, because so I mean, sometimes that's in the early days, but later on, I think most people I know have said, oh, it was a good choice and it was a worthwhile choice. Now they can see that. But in the beginning, I'm not sure other people saw that. But some people make that decision early. Others, as I said, maybe have a family first, but then they go off to practice more, and they still look after their family in a spiritual way. So, like Ajahn Chah himself, he had his mother, and he brought his mother into the monastery to become a nun, so he could teach her and look after her. His father had died early, but he had brothers and sisters, and he taught them the Dhamma. The very first time I went to a house blessing was for Ajahn Chah's niece, who got married, and there was a big blessing ceremony at their house for that, and I went along. That's where I first learned how to do parita chanting, because it was for Ajahn Chah's niece. I thought, oh, I've got to learn these chants. Family, if they have family left, but they won't go and live with them and relate in the same old way anymore. Of course, they relate to them as a monastic, as a monk or a nun, giving them teaching, spiritual guidance, and support in whatever way they can, but not in the old way of just going out to work, earning money, and in that way. They'll do it in the way of a spiritual teacher.
Two more questions, Ajahn. Paul, we have received news where some say not to accept the vaccine, and on the other hand, a few doctors, including my niece, say it's better to have the vaccine. So, what to do and who to listen?
Well, there seems to be a very personal decision. Like you say, some people say get it, some don't. So I would, first of all, don't listen to other people too much, or listen to your own heart. But it's funny, isn't it? We usually follow the doctor's advice in so many things. If the doctor is saying get vaccinated, why not follow this time? That's one way of looking at it. If you're normally following your GP or your doctor's advice, well, in this situation, you could probably carry on doing that. And I think most of the medical advice is get the vaccine. But if you're not sure, you have a health condition, or you're worried about blood clotting or all the different things you've heard, well, that's your choice. So it really is up to you, isn't it? As an individual, you get it, you don't. What you might remember is you get the vaccine or not, you're still going to die. You get that vaccine, okay, you might not die from coronavirus, but you'll die from something else. So whether you get the vaccine or not, practice the Dhamma, improve your mind, let go of those negative habits, keep the precepts, meditate, whether you get the vaccine or not. If you reach Nibbana, it won't matter anyway.
Thank you, Paul. Um, is it alright for a rape victim to abort, although it involves breaking the precept? And how can mindfulness meditation guide us to achieve good positive thoughts at the moment of death so that we can attain a good rebirth?
Can you just repeat the first question?
The first one is it alright for a rape victim to abort the baby, although it involves breaking the precept?
Well, you may be aware as a monk, I'm not allowed to promote abortion because that's killing, and monks can't do that. All I can say is, if you have been raped, you have my full sympathy. It must be a horrible experience. And I would understand if you get pregnant from a rape, it must be a terrible situation to be in. So you have my full support and understanding. But again, like vaccine, really, you have to make that decision yourself based on your own circumstances. All I can say is, if that really did arise for you as a situation that you ended up pregnant from a rape, if you could really set all your emotions aside and all the conventions and all the opinions of other people, you may get to the point where you see it's still worth bringing the baby into the world and bringing him up as an act of compassion, dana, for that being that is now formed in your womb. Horrible. you may get to that point. And I actually know one or two people who have had this experience and were encouraged finally, although most people said, yeah, the abortion, they were encouraged to find a bond and a good relationship with the baby. It's possible. But in the end, you have to decide for yourself, don't you? But be aware, killing a fetus, even if it's conceived through a rape, is still a very strong form of karma, the karma of killing, which may bring regrets and sadness later of another form. I know rape is a terrible thing, but this is something you have to decide for yourself. Obviously, in your circumstances, we can only speak generally here, and so general answers are maybe not always the best. It depends on the situation. Repeat it.
Lampao, how can mindfulness meditation guide us to achieve good positive thoughts at the moment of death so that we can attain a good rebirth?
Well, mindfulness itself is a good positive thought. So any mindfulness meditation technique you've been developing through your life, you can use up to the moment where you lose consciousness. Some people are lucky enough to be conscious right up to the moment of the death. Others maybe up to a point where they become unconscious and then later die. Right, mindfulness. And if you practice, say, mindfulness of breathing regularly through your life, that may be something you can turn to with the onset of death. You can turn to the breath as a way to steady your mind, let go of worries, fears, negativity. Do that. And I know people who have, and it really helps them. It helps the mind to stay calm when it's tempted to be afraid, confused, scattered. Um, as long as your breath is going in and out, you can base mindfulness on that. Of course, it's not easy at the end because the weakness of the body, maybe the breath is very inconsistent, coarse, rough. Your breath changes as you die. So how well you do it depends. But you could have that goal just to practice mindfulness in every situation using the breath or another meditation object, or mindfulness of the Buddha. The Buddha said, if you're afraid or you're dying and you're not sure what to do, think of the Buddha. Such a wholesome thought. If you've been developing your faith and your practice through your life, calming energy, steady the mind in one way or another at that time. So it's a very wholesome thought to have as you die. And there's a number of things you could think of. If you're aware and you're able to choose, well, you could recollect the good karma you've made, recollect the Buddha or another teacher, recollect your object of meditation will be best of all. So the breath or Buddha, or so whatever meditation you're used to using to develop mindfulness, try and develop that now while you're strong, healthy. Develop it through your life, and it can really help you right to the end of your life.
Thank you, Lampao. And then finally, one last question from Sister Jesseline.
Brother. Good evening, Long Paul. Thank you, Long Paul, for all your teaching. Happy Vesak as well. Long Paul, today's talk, Long Paul brought up that the others is that we bring up reflection. I've been doing that. Long Paul, what type of meditation do we call this kind of always bringing up thoughts for reflection? Is it samadhi, samatha, or what type of meditation is that? Because when I want to share with my friends, I don't know how to tell them what type of meditation is it called. Thank you, Long.
Well, particularly, um, I don't know if you're hearing me. Are you hearing me? Yeah, okay. So particularly, you might call the reflection on impermanence. So being mindful, anicca nupassana, clear seeing, clear insight into impermanence, or it could be just mindfulness of the perception of impermanence. And you keep doing it regularly. So you start to notice things arise, pass away, a thought, a feeling, a sensation in your body, a situation. You go to work and then you come home. You outdoors and it starts to rain and then the rain stops. You have a feeling, a sensation of cold air on your body and then it passes away. You have a memory of something and it passes away. You're becoming more and more familiar with arising and ceasing in your experience. And some people have found that very helpful. In the beginning, you might call it a form of samatha, just as a way to establish mindfulness and clear away other hindrances. So the scattered nature of the mind is clearing away by focusing on impermanence. Later on, it might become vipassana, just seeing and knowing the arising and ceasing of formations. So sometimes when you practice, the borderline between samatha and vipassana is a bit blurred. But as long as you're developing mindfulness, focused on the present moment, your mind, your body, the five khandhas, it doesn't really matter whether you call it samatha or vipassana, or you're really just practicing, cultivating to experiment with maybe and see for yourself, does this work for me? Does it help?